This is 40,000 miles. Yes, that's right, my Ford GT has now traveled 40,000 miles. Well, not quite, it's something like 39,200 miles, but it's close enough. And so today I wanted to give you an update on my high mileage Ford GT and how it's been since I bought it 4 years ago. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era with free listings. You can list your cool car for free and auction it on Cars and Bids. And you should, because we've had some great sales lately, including this 991 Porsche 911, which sold for over $71,000, this fantastic old school Toyota MR2 Turbo, which brought just over $16,000, and this wonderful Subaru BRZ Series Yellow, which sold for over $30,000. If you're looking to buy or sell a cool enthusiast car from the modern era, Cars and Bids is the place to do it. With daily auctions, great selection, and free listings, check it out at carsandbids.com. Okay, so let's talk Ford GT. I bought this car in September of 2018, so more than 4 years ago. And I still remember when I bought it, I was absolutely terrified by every aspect of it. I had never bought anything this expensive before. I had never bought a house. This car was like so much and so scary, and it made me so nervous to buy and to drive for the first little while. But I still remember buying it, driving it home, and at that time, it had right around 31,000 miles. In fact, it was 31,306. So now we're at 39,300, give or take. So I've driven the car 8,000 miles in a little over 4 years. Now, that's an enormous amount of miles. You're gonna look at this and you're gonna say 8,000 miles in 4 years, that's nothing. But here's the deal. First off, the vast majority of these cars, these Ford GTs, have never driven 8,000 miles in their whole lives since 2005. So 17 years they've never driven. I would say that 90% of Ford GTs are under 5,000 miles, and many of them have less than 500 miles. It's amazing to me how often these come up for sale and they have 26 miles or 9 miles and the original plastic on this and that. That's pretty common with these cars, but me driving at 8,000 miles is huge for a Ford GT, and of course 40,000 miles is really huge. And in fact, I drove this car the other day to Palm Springs from where I live in San Diego. Round trip's about 250, 300 miles, and it hit me that that's more mile than many of these Ford GTs have ever seen in their entire lives. Just that one drive to and from Palm Springs. So 8,000 miles since I bought this car is a lot, and frankly, it's a lot for someone like me. I own 7 different vehicles. I have a 1-year-old child, and I have no commute. And so there's not a lot of opportunities to drive this car. And so I think I've done a pretty good job balancing between the other 6 cars, and the baby doesn't ride in it, obviously. And so having all of that work out and still driving the car 8,000 miles is pretty good in 4 years. I try to use it whenever I have the chance, and I'm putting on miles and enjoying the car pretty much whenever I can. And frankly, I think that's the right way to do it with this car. One of the interesting things about these Ford GTs, they built about 4,000 of them. And one of the interesting things is that people knew when they were new cars that they were gonna become collectible. They were gonna be special collector's item vehicles someday. And a lot of people parked them. And so the reality is there's a lot of these with low miles, really low miles. And thus the premium for an ultra low mile car is not that much compared to the price for one that's been driven. You definitely lose some money by driving the car, but you also gain an enormous amount of enjoyment, and it's not as much of a difference as in other cars because low mile Ford GTs are just so easy to find. And every time I drive this car and enjoy it and use it, I think to myself, what a shame there are people out there who never really get to experience and enjoy this car, who just have one sitting in their collection to brag about. And I think this is such a special car to use and to own. But the big question here in this video is, how has it been? 4.5 years with this car, almost 40,000 miles now. How has it been? The short answer is amazing, fantastic, like a dream, honestly. I broke down with this car one time, and that was 90 days into my ownership with it and less than 500 miles since I bought it. All it was a loose battery ground, but I didn't know. The car was new to me. I had only had it for a couple months. I had no idea what to look for. I was nervous about it because it was my expensive sports car. I was so scared. And so I had it flatbedded home and I was really nervous. And eventually they figured out that that's what it was. That's all it was. And ever since then, the car has been totally fine. But at that moment, I thought I'd be in for a very tough, difficult experience with this car. And of course, you hear from Jeremy Clarkson on Top Gear, who owned one of these, that he had nothing but problems. Well, I spoke one-on-one to James May about that situation. And James May told me what everybody says, which is Clarkson had to install an aftermarket alarm system and immobilizer. The insurance company that he used made him do that when he bought this car. And that was the thing that kept causing problems with his Ford GT. The vehicle itself, the driving experience, the powertrain, whatever, was dead reliable. And that has been my experience as well. Aside from that one breakdown 500 miles into my experience, I have never had any other issues with this car, and it's never even hiccuped. In fact, I consider this to be probably the most reliable car I own, right up with my new Land Rover Defender, which I know people laugh at. Oh, Land Rover's not reliable, but new cars are reliable. And that's saying a lot for a 17-year-old, limited use vehicle, that it's that reliable. I probably wouldn't say that about a 2005 Ferrari or Lamborghini if I had it, but this car is just rock solid reliable, and it has been ever since then. So let's talk costs. I've owned this car now for over 4 years, and over the last 4 years, the cost to own this car, all of the maintenance and repairs that I've done, has totaled at $11,513.05. $11,513.05. Although actually the car is due for another service in a couple of weeks, which will be an oil change. Then they always find a couple other little things that are getting old, whatever. So figure maybe another, $1,500, $2,000. So figure $13,000 in service over 4 years and 2 months of ownership. One interesting thing, I have a comparison for that. My yellow Land Rover Defender, over the same period, has cost me $11,573 to own, which is basically identical to the Ford GT. And interestingly, the mileage has only been a bit more on the Defender. I drove about 10,000 miles in the yellow Defender over the last 4 years and 8,000 miles in the Ford GT. So they've cost the same to own. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, since Defenders have such a reputation for being unreliable, but the truth is that's very cheap for an exotic sports car. $11,000 over 4 years works out to $2,000 to $3,000 a year. You compare that to Ferraris. Older Ferraris have engine out services, basically no unscheduled service visits for this car. It's just all been sort of, oil change and a few other little things. It's been pretty reliable and relatively cheap to own compared to other exotic sports cars, which usually aren't. And of course, there's the other good thing about the Ford GT, which is it's way up in value since I bought it. So when I bought this car 4.5 years ago, I paid $225,000. And again, at the time, I was terrified. And I thought I was overpaying. It was too much money, but I was buying it from the original owner. He kept all the receipts. He did an amazing job maintaining the car. So I thought it was worth paying a little extra, what I thought was extra at the time, $225,000. Now, this car I think is probably worth somewhere in the $325,000 to $360,000 range. It's hard to know, by the way, because there are not a lot with mileage like this, but occasionally one comes up. We sold the higher mileage one on Cars and Bids for I think $345,000 a couple of months ago. And my car is a slightly more desirable color combination than that one. So the car not only has only cost me $11,000 over 4.5 years, but it's also gone up in value so much, 150%, basically, $125,000, that it has more than covered, obviously, the repairs and maintenance, but also my sales tax, which was $15,000 when I bought it, my adding clear film. The whole car is covered in clear paint protection film, which costs like $6,000. Fuel, probably, insurance, probably, all the usual car costs have all been covered by the increase in value. And frankly, there's probably still some money left over on top of all of that stuff. So it's done pretty well. Now, that's a rare situation. I got the timing perfect on this car. There have been other cars I've bought that I have not timed so well, but this car did well. It's important to mention, I still don't view cars as investments. This car has done very well, but regular investing over this time span probably would have done just as well, if not better. And cars are much more variable than that. You never know what might happen. It could require an engine tomorrow and destroy basically the entire, profit that I've made, supposedly. But regardless of any of that, getting paid to drive a Ford GT 8,000 miles It's not a bad life. And that's pretty much exactly what's happened over the last 4.5 years. Now, obviously we're seeing some changes in the car market right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if Ford GTs dip a little bit more, and maybe this won't be as true, but I suspect they won't ever get back to where I bought this car. And so I probably will do okay in it. So it's cost me a little to own, not an enormous amount, but it's also gained a ton of value. So I've had this car 4.5 years. I have an enormous amount of experience driving it, obviously using it, parking it, day to day, everything. And you might be wondering, how is it? What do I think of the Ford GT? In a word, I would describe it as awesome. And the things that I like the most are, frankly, the thing that I like the most is the driving experience. I love how the car drives. I've driven everything, obviously, for my YouTube channel, and I find this to be one of the most rewarding cars, especially at this price point. And I also consider it to be one of the most iconic cars that is also usable. Usually when you think about iconic cars, you're thinking about stuff like the Countach, the Diablo, Ferrari F40, Carrera GT. All those cars are very special, but you can't really use any of those cars with any frequency. They're difficult to get into, they're rough, they scrape on everything, they're low, they're expensive to own and operate, you're always nervous about them. This car is an icon. Everyone knows what it is, everyone appreciates it, and yet it's also pretty damn usable. I drive it everywhere. My dog rides in it. I take it everywhere I go when I can, when I'm not having a baby with me or multiple people or I'm not carrying a lot of stuff. And it just works. It's great and I love it, and it works in those situations all the time. And it's just fun to drive. The shifting and clutch is just fantastic. Buttery smooth once it warms up. It is so good. The power delivery is phenomenal. Amazing muscle, amazing performance, always got great torque. Great on the highway straight line where you want to pass somebody, great in curvy roads. The steering and handling is great. Could use a little more weight in the front end. I also like the fact that the approach and departure angles are easy. It has good normal sports car approach and departure angles, so getting it into a difficult driveway or curb type situation, usually not that much of a problem. Wish the doors were normal, but they are not. Truthfully, in a day-to-day driving experience, the car is just so rewarding. It's easy, it's robust, it's reliable, and also it's fun and exciting and fast and thrilling. And it's an amazing combination. And then you have this sort of iconic, beautiful look and the knowledge that you're driving this incredible icon car. You wouldn't necessarily be able to do that as regularly if it was a Countach or a Testarossa. You'd be worried about breakdowns, parts would be expensive. This car is just not that. Now, a couple things worth mentioning about the driving experience, and comfort is a big thing that comes up with this car. When you look at the seats of a Ford GT, they have all these plastic holes in them. And so people think, oh my God, that looks tremendously uncomfortable. And the truth is, I just don't think it is. When you sit on that, it looks uncomfortable, I agree. But when you sit on that, you don't feel like each individual plastic hole. That's not like how sitting works. Your back kind of diffuses that over your entire back. I don't really feel it. The seats are hard, but they're hard in every exotic car. And there's a lot more space in this car than there is in most other exotics. I recently drove a Lotus Esprit, which kind of was ending when this car was starting, but regardless, similar era. And you know, you're kind of like this in that car a little bit. Ferraris are tight from that era, coupe Ferraris. This car is, I always tell people, it was made for Americans. So tall people, wide people, they can generally fit in this car. Yes, you got to duck down a little when you close the door because it might chop off your head. But generally speaking, it's a drivable, usable, easy car. And it's comfortable. And I drive the car on long trips. I've driven it all the way to San Luis Obispo, which is like 6 hours basically. I've driven it to Palm Springs several times, which is 6 hours round trip. Los Angeles, no problem. Taking it to Orange County later today, about 3 hours round trip. It just works and it's not so bad. It's not a car I would necessarily want to drive across the country. No cruise control, and it is a little tight in there. But for all the trips you could do, it's more usable than any other exotic car. Now, with that said, there are some drawbacks to this car, and there's some interesting ones that I didn't expect when I bought it. The biggest drawback I would say about owning this car, honestly, is the number of people who try to race you and get excited and try to goad you into racing them. I've always had sports cars, and this has always been kind of a thing, but it's like whatever. In this car, I cannot drive it 15 minutes without someone coming up and I was on the 15 freeway coming back to San Diego the other day in it, and someone came up to me in an RS5 with an army green wrap and just constantly tried to race, go back for probably 30 minutes. And I never once looked over. I just like did this because it gets so annoying. And the thing about it is, I can't race people in this car, okay? You shouldn't be racing people on the street in anything, but like, Imagine doing it in this. Like, everyone will see. Everyone knows who I am. That's a problem. But also police are going to look at this and be like, what, that, it's such an obvious, I mean, it's just out of the realm and out of the question. It will never occur. But I think what happens is people see this car and they think, oh my God, it's a Ford GT. This is my chance to line up next to a Ford GT. And that's the drawback of being such a usable, iconic car, is that you use it and it really is an icon for a lot of people. And some of the reactions are incredibly positive to this car, but some of them are, hey, let's race. And it happens in an hour on the freeway. It probably happens 6 or 7 times that someone in some special car, Evo, STI, Focus ST, RS5, even other supercars, they want to line up. They want to see how they'll do against a famed Ford GT. I don't bother with any of that. The other thing that I consider to be a drawback about this car, I don't love the colors. I always wanted white with blue stripes. I bought this car from a friend, Carl Brower, who was also like an automotive journalist, automotive connected world person extraordinaire. And he had it, and he was the original owner, and he kept it very well, and this was the color he had. And if it was up to me, it was, but I bought his car. If I had really decided to just go searching, whatever, I would have bought white with blue stripes, and I would have loved to have a heritage car, which is the Gulf blue with the orange livery. Those cars are far more expensive. White with blue would have been about the same money, but this was just the car I found. I've always kind of regretted the color, and I wouldn't be surprised if someday down the line I sell this car just to get a color that I want a little bit more. I always think I want to have a Ford GT, but this color is not my ideal, let's put it that way. The other thing, the other drawback, the interesting drawback about this car that I truly wasn't expecting as I've kind of spent time with it, is the values have climbed so much that I am now once again afraid to use it. So when I bought this car at $225,000, I was nervous, I was scared. Using it was very scary. Parallel parking was like a 9-minute thing. I would get out and look, I mean, it was terrified. Over time, I've made more money, obviously. I've gotten used to the car, and I've gotten okay with the fact that it's usable. But now the values are climbing again, and I never really expected they would shoot up from where I bought it, which I already thought was a lot of money. I never really thought that they would shoot up well beyond that, but they have. And so it's interesting because I'm like now afraid of driving it all over again. Not as afraid as I initially was, but certainly it's on your mind. It's, you know, it's one thing, $200,000 cars are very special, but there's a lot of them on the market today, to be honest. You can't even get a new Ferrari for that price anymore. I mean, and you see Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and places like this fairly frequently. This car is now a lot more valuable than that. And so it feels more special. It feels like you gotta be more careful. And so once again, I'm like a little bit more nervous than I used to be about using it. But that's it. 40,000 miles in a Ford GT. And even though I'm only doing 2,000 to 3,000 miles a year, and it's gonna take time to continue to expand the mileage, I look forward to that time. I look forward to the continued use of this car. I love driving it. It is such an icon. Everybody loves my friends riding in it, driving it. It's just so special. And I think it's so much more special than a Ferrari. You know, this was a direct competitor to the 430 at the time, to the Gallardo. Those cars are really cool, but this car has kind of attained this sort of mythical, iconic status, and it deserves it. It's an amazing driving experience, incredibly rare, reliable, and the look is just so special. And I feel so privileged to own this car and to have gotten this much time behind the wheel, which is really the greatest privilege of all if you have a Ford GT.